Hi all. In today's session, we are going to discuss more about the memory allocation and the process management of operating systems. As we all know, the basic responsibility of any operating system is to be an interface between the user and the computer. But along with that function, the operating system also has other very primary important functions such as process management, memory allocation, and so on. So when we discuss about process management, let us first think about how a program gets converted to process. Our text file or the code that we have written is actually called as a program. And during its process of execution, the program is taken by the compiler to compile it to object code, and this object code is then sent to linker to link all additional files, and then convert this program into an executable file. This executable file is again sent to loader, another program, and the loader loads this program into memory, and when it is loaded into memory, it becomes a process. So that is the time frame, that is the history of a text code being converted to something called as a process. And now anything that is inside the memory is generally considered as a process. For a process to execute, we require memory and sufficient enough memory that the process can finish its execution at a nearly fast pace of time. So I've been discussing about program execution, where program gets converted to a process. As far as memory is concerned, the memory is allocated to any process as a contiguous memory allocation. Contiguous memory allocation means it is continuously allocated from sequential order 1 to n or from n to m. Therefore, in both process, such as the fixed partitioning process or the dynamic partitioning process, the memory is generally allocated in a continuous fashion. Now let us consider about the basic theme for today's session. The theme is about fragmentation. I have already mentioned that the memory is allocated continuously, both in the fixed partitioning mechanism as well as in the dynamic partitioning mechanism. But there arises a small problem in this kind of an allocation. This problem is actually identified as fragmentation, particularly in the case of operating systems. Let us see what is a fragmentation. In the case of fragmentation, which is generally an unwanted problem of operating system, unwanted issue that is created by operating system. The fragmentation is actually an unwanted problem in which the operating system, through the process of memory allocation, allocates process into memory, and some amount of free space is available in the memory after allocation. This free space can be called as fragments, and the issue is actually called as fragmentation. So if we have small free spaces after the allocations of processes, let's say P1, P2, P3, P4, etc., all these processes, and then the remaining very small space that is unused, that is underutilized, are generally considered as fragments, and the issue is actually called as fragmentation. Now when the continuous memory allocation is done by the operating system, the process enters the RAM, that is the main memory. Let's say, for example, let's say we have four processes P1, P2, P3 and P4, and having our memory space as fixed partition, that is 2 MB, 4 MB, 8 MB and etc. Now some amount of the portion of the entire memory is being utilized by operating system, and the remaining space of memory is allocated for user programs. in the fixed partition, that is the case 1, in the fixed partition such as 2 MB, 4 MB and 8 MBs. Let's see what happens after the allocation. Let's suppose we have a program with a size of 3 MB, where 3 MB could be easily accommodated to a block of 4 MB rather than a block of 2 MB. So the program P1 or the process P1 gets allocated to the first block, which is having the total space of 4 MB, and after allocation you can see that there is a 1 MB free space that is available, unused. These kind of small spaces, small memory areas that are unused are generally called as the internal fragmentation. Now, how do we avoid this internal fragmentation? One simple issue to avoid the internal fragmentation is to go for a dynamic allocation. That is, you do not allocate the memory predefined into fixed blocks, but allocate memory as and when the process comes into the memory, as and when there is a demand of a process. So if a process P1 comes into memory of a size 4 MB, you can allocate 4 MB from the entire space to the program, and likewise, so that after some point of time you will have a very little space of fragmentation, and thus we can reduce the concept of internal fragmentation. Let us again discuss about the next concept called as external fragmentation. As in the case of internal fragmentation was actually a problem that arose because of fixed partitioning. Here we are considering the dynamic partitioning. Let's say we have a process, we have an entire memory of 12 MB or maybe 20 MB, and through dynamic partitioning, processes P1, P2 up to Pn having the memory size such as 4 MB, 8 MB and 2 MB are coming into the memory. Now let's say if we are allocating 8 MB into memory space, and after some point of time, let's say I have taken an example of a process 5 that requires 45 KB of memory space. We altogether have 50 MB of space available. But what happens is that because it's non-contiguous, it is there in 3 different spaces. Since it is non-contiguous, you cannot accommodate 45 KB of a process into memory. Instead, what we have is that we have a underutilized space of 30 KB, 10 KB, and again another 10 KB, which means though we have 50 KB of size available, it cannot be used for a 45 KB of space of process because the allocation is non-contiguous. So this concept is actually called as external fragmentation. So how to remove the external fragmentation? The problem occurs when you allocate the main memory into process continuously. So what we can do is we can remove this condition, the external fragmentation. If you remove the condition of dynamic partitioning, then in one way or the other, the external fragmentation issue can be reduced. Moreover, issues such as paging, segmentation, and other kinds of complex procedures of operating system are also one of the reasons for external fragmentation. Now, how do you remove this external fragmentation? There are a couple of mechanisms. One mechanism that we are discussing is about compaction, where you are trying to remove, where you are trying to combine all those free spaces into one single space, and then accommodate that single space into the larger process that can accommodate this space, that can fit into this space. That is one issue, one solution, compaction. The next solution is about the issue of paging and segmentation, where memory is allocated. I have already mentioned about paging and segmentation. Issue is about paging and segmentation, where memory is allocated to process non-contiguously, where you can bring into the process of 4 MB through different pages of a small page size. That can also reduce the concept of external fragmentation. So by these two methods, external fragmentation can be reduced. By the earlier process of avoiding fixed partitioning and taking the dynamic partition, you can overcome the internal fragmentation. So that is all for today's session. Thank you very much.